First of all, I need to apologize for a very bad throat. This Delhi weather and AQI has done me in, and I'm really hoping that I can finish my small presentation without a coughing bout. Anyway, I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to reflect on the contours of history writing and the need to reiterate the importance of empirical and secular shades of the discipline. Now, for me, this is an occasion to remember Professor D.N. Jha. Professor Jha was my teacher when I was doing post-graduation in Delhi University, way back in 1980s. And it was an honor to meet him. When we met him, we were really in awe of him. That is way back in 1980s. He was already a person with a majestic appearance, many books he had already written. But what I remember, and interestingly, he always used to speak in very soft tones. So it used to take us a while to understand his radical undertones. But one of the things that I remember when I was his student was he asked us to remain very loyal to the scientific discipline of history. History and science, we would wonder, what does he mean? But then when he explained it to us, that history has to be based on rationality and on empiricism, things became so much more comprehensible to us. I remember I saw an evolution in personality of Sir. 1980s, well, we did detect some ideas about politics, but with the passage of time, he gave a full-throated articulation to his ideas, that is in 1990s, and by that time he was already a public intellectual. Friends, I use this particular occasion to share my experiences as a teacher, a history teacher and researcher, and I can cite some of my students sitting here, which has actually been a pleasure. I did not expect them here, but yes, I'm going to narrate some of my experiences about that. And I have been teaching history for a very long time now, and I come across students from all walks of lives, and even from different regions of the country. What I have been able to see in past couple of years, 10 years or more, last 5 years or so, is a sense, it is a perceptible difference. One reason for that is the persistent mutations of the syllabus that we have to undergo, which has left all of us exhausted. Yes, I am really speaking for the annual mode that we used to have earlier. Now we are pressed for time, and we are so exhausted, my students and I would say, transacting so many courses throughout, that I doubt that we are left with any real time to mull over the issues that we introduce in our classroom teaching. Now, added to that, this is a systemic issue without a doubt, but added to that, there's another thing that I as a teacher have begun noticing. Nowadays, these students who I say come from all around the country, they come with a certain idea of what is history and how history should be written. And they seem to be very firm about that. They also have come with an enterprise to correct history, to correct the distorted history, to repossess history. They have firm belief in their, not all, I can cite students who may not be believing that, but many of them believe in their heritage, they're very proud of it, their lineage, their past, and brook no critique to it. And when I tell them that there would be a time, especially to the first year students, that you learn the art of critical thinking, they all are pleasantly surprised, but some resist the idea. Amongst the first things that I tell them is, friends, that you do not take any historical investigation as the given. It has to be arrived at, and there is a methodology to it. So, and you arrive at a truth only after consulting various sources at your disposal. These could be literary, archaeological sources. Along with that, you also need to read the works of various scholars that test logic. So if you do that, there is a wholesome understanding of history. In fact, understanding history is all about that. I am also very apprehensive of some students who do talk about history as they have studied at the school level. NCRT books, I would say. We all know that, NCRT books at the middle and the high level have been rationalized, or rather, many deletions have come in. And here I would agree with what Kumkum Roy had to say, that in the process, students have not become conversant with very many facts, stark social differences, the knowledge of karmakaras, dasas, or I think one thing that really bothers me is the idea of kingship, especially in the context of Ashok. I mean, Ashok was one king who brought about a change in the notion of kingship. The whole institution of kingship he changed by showing it to the world that you can become a king by bringing in social harmony, avoiding violence rather than using it. I really sincerely hope that students can take that as a matter of pride instead of ignoring Ashok or thinking of him as a weak king. Now, another problem that students have, and again, I would say, is mixing myth with history. The confusion between the two. Many are surprised when we tell them how you differentiate between the two. Before I come to this, I also ask them one very simple question. In the first year, this is first question. There's a time when we used to have long hours to chat with students. Nowadays, the whole idea of finishing the course is drumming on our heads, and probably we don't get in those long conversations. But still, in the tutorial classes, if we can snatch those moments, I ask them, where do they get their information about history apart from the textbooks? Well, most of the time the reply comes in form of social media, WhatsApp. And yes, you can talk about the WhatsApp university. And the thing that bothers me is that they're convinced about the veracity of the WhatsApp university. I'm again reiterating that many of them do come from the remote parts of the country, and many of them, along with their family members, are convinced that whatever they are saying is the truth. They don't even realize that they don't realize the truth that they're encountering is the WhatsApp truth. This is something that can be manufactured. In today's colloquial language, if I were to use, they are imbued with a surround sound so loud that the reason often gets drowned there. As I just mentioned, that my initial lectures, especially when I was teaching ancient India, would revolve around the idea, how do you distinguish myth from history? So I asked them, which is the favorite period of history? And either because they want to impress me or they genuinely believe in it, they say, of course, ancient India. And why ancient India? Because this is a very glorious period. Golden age. It's so pure, it's so pristine. And I cannot forget one response coming from a student a couple of years back, that it's almost analogous to the Satyug. Why so? Well, medical science was so advanced at that time. The physicians were aware of all the cures at that point in time. You had surgeons who could carry on surgeries like the rhinoplasty, which was responsible for changing the head of Lord Ganesha. And because this was mentioned in a science congress session, who could doubt it? Yeah. Now, I do agree with them that we need to have a sense of pride when it comes to the kind of literature, medical literature our country has churned out. Charak Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, there is no doubt about it. But then I want to push them a little and ask them, Why do they think that this transplantation did not carry on for too long? Or why did it not spread out to the world? Or why did Lord Ganesha not have a head, a face of a human being? Obviously, they're confusing myth and history. Now, at no point can I ever say that mythology or myths can be completely debunked. No historian of ancient India would tell us that. But we also have to recognize that myths are presented in a particular kind of a frame. We call it the fantasy frame. And it is the job of a professional historian to cull the historical material out of it. And that's why studying history in a professional way is more important. When we think of it, people are thinking everybody today can study history, talk about history, possess history. But there is a difference between possession of history and studying it in a very professional way. There are other issues that I talk about them, and one challenge comes up when I'm talking about Hinduism. Hinduism in a very nuanced version of Vedism and Puranic tradition. This is very much a part of their course. The impression is that Sanatan Dharma they follow is eternal, monolithic, tolerant, non-violent and non-proselytizing tradition, almost monotheistic. Where does it result from? They are watching the television serials, Ramayana, Mahabharata. The digital means they are fed every day in general political environment nowadays. Now, through the lectures and citing of sources, I introduce them to some very verifiable historical facts. Time and again, I endorse its verifiable historical facts. And the first is, I tell them the difference between Vedic and Puranic tradition. Without doubt, even when Puran keeps on harping on its interconnection with the Vedic tradition, the two are different. The two are different on a historical canvas. And without doubt, a Puranic tradition was far more inclusive. Women were a part of it, which may not have been in the earlier tradition. And when we talk about the Vedic religious tradition, it hinged on performance of animal sacrifices and had no image or temple worship. Now, many examples of these sacrifices can be found in the texts like the Rig Samhita, the Shatapat Brahmana, the Atharvaved. The most important thing is that I encourage them to read the sources themselves. Do not take my word as the final word. That's the first thing that I say. These are the texts, read them. They are readily available in Sanskrit, English and Hindi versions. You can take a look at it. But I also request them to understand these practices in a particular social context, in a context of social formation. Some of my students are here and they would bear the fact that my one word that I keep harping is social formations, and I tell them that it is not just a course that you do in the first year. It will carry on with your life if you pursue the discipline of history. And in this context, you must try and understand it in the setting, a pastoral setting, a tribal lifestyle, the concept of sacrifice, the availability of certain types of food, their current dietary practices, etc. And in the process, they would be able to understand rationally how even the priestly class gradually shifted from a non-vegetarian food practice to the advocacy of vegetarianism. This is a gradual process, and things will become clearer when you start looking at that in a historical context. Secondly, we also study Hinduism and historiography associated with it very holistically. The idea of Hindu being mild and tolerant comes from the works of travelers like Bernier, Orientalists like William Jones, social reformers like Vivekanand, political thinkers and activists like Tilak, Gandhi and Nehru. Without a doubt, this idea has circulated on social media and is very dear to our students, many of whom think that all the problems have come with the coming of Islam. We discuss this objectively in the class. It is true this religious sects in early India, particularly in early medieval India, exhibited a notable degree of mutual accommodation. Also, much later, the projection of non-violent India was an essential approach to freedom struggle. Many Purans of the medieval times show Buddha and Adinath, the first Tirthankar, as an avatar of Vishnu around the 6th century CE. However, there is a substantial evidence to challenge the notion that India has always exhibited religious tolerance and that there was no conflict therein. We once again have to look at historical sources. Nothing that I can say in the class would be without substantiation from the sources, and there has to be credible information about this kind of antagonism that existed amongst various strains of Brahmanism, and also between Brahmanism on one side and the heterodox sects, Buddhism and Jainism, on the other. The Puranas reveal the hostility between the Shaiva and the Vaishnava traditions. For instance, Vishnu Purana asserts the superiority of Vishnu over both Buddha and Shiva and Kurma Puran condemns various Shaiva sects such as the Bhairavas, Kapalikas, Vamacharas as misleading and deserving of censure. But the important thing is there's a retaliation also, so that among the Shaiva worshippers also, whether in the textual material or in the historical narrative, you see that kind of attention. One historical example that I can cite here comes from the Chola history, where the Chola ruler Kulutunga II removed Vishnu's statue from Chidambaram temple's courtyard. And then we have other examples of hostility between Buddhism and Brahmanism in Kashmir, or Buddhism and or Jain tradition, Shaivism in South. There are many, many such examples. I don't think so I have that kind of a time to discuss that. The important thing is not that I have to make them aware of the conflict. The important thing is that we have to mull over, why does this conflict happen? Is it only on the religious factors, or there is some larger politics associated with it? At least give them the fodder for thinking. They will eventually form their ideas, but we just have to give the initial exposure to it. When I tell them that it was not just the Kshatriyas but Brahmins also who took up the martial activities, they are surprised again. But we have examples, epigraphic examples, Chandelas, Kalachuris, Chalukyas, Rashtrakuta inscriptions, or even the Cholas again, who gave this particular title of Brahmadhiraj to Brahmins who distinguished themselves in battle, and they were akhadas that came up to train the Brahmins in that field. But the more interesting issue that comes up is when I talk about conversions. Now, conversion is an issue which is a little, in today's language, dicey. The entire implication is that conversion is something that has happened only with the coming of Islam first, and after that with the coming of Christianity. Was it really so? I asked them. I give them examples from the Vedic corpus. There is a text called Panchavansha Brahmana. This gives us an idea of Vratyastoma. Vratyastoma was a ritual that was practiced and supposed to be followed by Vratyas, who are on the margins of the Brahminical worldview. Before the Vratyas could socially interact with the Orthodox Aryas, they had to undergo that ritual. Now, what is this? Do we call it conversion or not? A big question mark. But then again, there is a manual by this name of Soma Shambhu Paddhati, it is of 11th century, which prescribes the procedure of Lingodhar. Now, this was clearly a ritual to convert non-Shaivas into the Shaiva tradition. Now, these are examples that one is giving of a time when Islam could not have made any substantial inroads into the Indian subcontinent, and apprising this to students is important to get an objective view of history. Many are also surprised that Vedic corpus could be dated to, say, 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. In opinion of some, this is Devavani. It's so divine that it can never be dated. And if you want to date it, then the best thing is to give it a date of 80,000 years ago. Well, there are also queries about the overlap of Harappa and Vedic age, and there are many works of many scholars to endorse the idea. One can sense a kind of a reluctance amongst the students to believe a full-fledged civilization can predate Vedic culture. I ask them to complement whatever readings that they are doing along with the works of historians and archaeologists who will scientifically compare the two. They must definitely make that exercise themselves, but more important, understand the dating techniques before they arrive at the conclusion that there can be no time given to when the Vedic corpus came up. Friends, I would say I'm becoming increasingly convinced that studying human evolutionary process, prehistory and proto-history, should be made mandatory for all of us. Our young generation must understand that even the belief systems have evolutionary stages. They must also understand that when they are studying religion or history in a history class, then the religious dispositions must be kept aside. Today's real challenge for teachers and researchers is primarily twofold, that's my opinion. First, to rid historical interpretations of the notions of glorious period, golden age, which makes objective analysis very difficult. And second, to deconstruct and rationally explain the evolution of Hindu identity on a historical canvas. It is difficult to persuade some that the concept of Hindu identity can be understood as an overarching term and may have been a colonial invention. This is not to say that the Vedic tradition did not exist, or the Puranic sects like Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Shaktism, or the challenging sects like, traditions like Buddhism, Jainism, Charvakas and Tantricism did not exist before the 18th century. They thrived, there's no doubt about it. But here I am talking in terms of the Hindu identity. Now, in my opinion, the early colonial rulers did not understand this plurality and looked for something akin to their monotheistic traditions, which were based on the book and the church. And hence there was the need to create something akin to it. Possibly the Brahmins whom they consulted pandered to this. So for this, it becomes important that I talk to my students about the term Hindu. Go back to the historical genesis of it. Understand it in its geographic, linguistic, ethnic terminology. Understand it holistically. When has it come up? And it is very important. I can't say that it happened in 18th century and then stick to that. No, the word Hindu has come up much earlier. You have epigraphic evidence of Rana Sambha calling himself Hindu Sultana, which is also almost like Sultan, Hindu Sultan. Or the works of Kabir, Eknath, Bhakti poets, Ananta Das, talking about Hindus, but using it more in the context of, of the elite factor of high, caste-centric ideology which they were critiquing. My submission is basically that the word Hindu becomes more prolific in the Sanskrit literature only after the 18th century. So I try and tell them, try and understand that the whole concept of Hindu may have come up as a term that is subsumed other traditions within it a little later, though other traditions have had a fairly long historicity. Now, monotheism and homogenized Hinduism have gained currency in recent years, and many of us tend to forget, yes sir, that we have a rich pluralistic polytheistic tradition that has existed for many years. My own work, PhD work on bull cults, had shown me that numerous bull cults could coexist at one point in time, and I tell them the same, that friends, do take a look at the fact that you have Kula Devtas, Devis and Grama Devtas, and do you worship them? They say yes. And then we have to understand we've had a pluralistic tradition. Is there a need to have something that homogenizes it? Why can't we celebrate that kind of plurality? Just the last point about the Sanatan Dharma, a topic that keeps coming up in the discussions. I personally feel that Sanatan Dharma is something that it can be associated with ease, with Sadachar, with Sadharan Dharma, with, of course, Varna Ashram Dharma too. And when I say, and it's multi-laced in that sense, and when I tell my students that it's a term which is which was common even in Buddhism. Many of them are surprised. We have references in Sutta Nipat and Dhammapad. So I asked them this final question: would you want to take Sanatan Dharma as a singular, enduring, everlasting tradition of only one particular sect from the hoary past, or would you like to look at it as a convergence of the Brahminic and Shramanic traditions? After all, concepts that seem to imbue both the traditions or other traditions too, like non-violence, truth, compassion, patience, love for others. This can't remain a privilege of only one tradition. It is shared by many. I would just like to end here. There are many other things that I do discuss in my class, but I am eating on the time now. All I can say is that I try my best to clear many cobwebs. I leave them with the questions to mull over. I may not be in a position to give them final responses, but Jha sir, I can assure you, we are taking forward the torch of scientific and secular history. Thank you.